I've touched on this, but this I think is the most important reason for me, which is that nothing else has worked. You know, we've heard this argument that you're actually going to alienate progressive Israelis, make their work harder. And I've been hearing this for a long time, and I wasn't, I was fairly convinced by it for a while, but one of the things I found around the attack on Gaza is that progressive Israelis were beside themselves. Beside themselves by the fact that they were reading that 94% of Jewish Israelis supported the attack on Gaza. Beside themselves because they were looking at the polling for the election, and it was pretty clear that this country was going to move hard right, which is simply to say that a lot of tactics have been tried. And not only aren't they working, things are getting worse in this country. We have to acknowledge that. Just to throw something else out there, when I was in Gaza, almost every Palestinian I met was not just critical of Israel, although they were certainly critical of Israel, certainly critical of the international community that had seemingly turned their backs on them. But I also heard people being quite critical of Hamas, being critical of many parts of their liberation struggle, being self-critical. And I heard this phrase, we have to admit that the tactics that we've been using are not working since things are getting worse, not better. This is in Gaza. And many people I talked to spoke openly about coexistence as well, which in some cases surprised me. I think if you hear that kind of self-criticism taking place in a sieged community, the least we can do is also admit that our tactics haven't worked, that things are getting worse on our end as well. So I don't quite see how a BDS movement could make things much worse for progressive Israelis. On the other hand, they might just work, which is a good argument for trying them. I'd like to close with another voice from Gaza. His name is Ibrahim Muammar, who's chairman of the National Society for Democracy and Law. He said, we were talking about the boycott, and he said that he doesn't want a boycott, he wants a trial. He wants a trial for the people who committed these crimes. And he's right. He's right. That is what the people of Gaza deserve. They deserve a trial for the war crimes committed. Right now, the balance of the world is preventing that from happening. In fact, what we're seeing this week is that Israel won't even cooperate with the fact-finding mission. This is a fact-finding mission without any teeth, headed by Judge Richard Goldstone from South Africa. He had wanted to investigate war crimes on both sides. He wanted to investigate Hamas war crimes as well as Israeli war crimes. But the Israeli government has done absolutely everything it can to sabotage his work, so that after the findings come out, they will be able to call the fact-finding mission illegitimate. This is Judge Richard Goldstone. Alan Dershowitz, I was in Geneva for the Durban Review Conference. Alan Dershowitz referred to Judge Richard Goldstone as some Jew. He said, so they found some Jew to head this fact-finding mission. Richard Goldstone is more than some Jew. He is one of the most respected jurists in the world. It means a lot that he took this job. We have to remember that the legacy of the Holocaust, the legacy of the horrors of the Second World War, it's not just the creation of the State of Israel. That's one of the legacies. The other is the entire architecture of international law. The world came together and said, never again. They laid down the rules of war. They wrote the Geneva Conventions. They wrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And Judge Goldstone is not picking on Israel. The UN is not picking on Israel, but we see this very clearly in the case of Judge Goldstone's own career. As a judge in South Africa, during the dying days of apartheid, he exposed many, many human rights violations committed by his own government. He headed up the famous Goldstone Commission, which was a definitive piece of precedent in South African history and was very important to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He also was chief prosecutor for the UN International Criminal Tribunals in former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. He's not picking on Israel. He's trying to apply international law everywhere he can, including Israel. You know, we hear this more and more, this idea that, that somehow the world is ganging up on this country. And I've been hearing it a lot in the context of the BDS call. But the truth is actually the opposite, that what the Israeli government is asking for, demanding, saying it's being discriminated against unless it gets it, is the right to be excluded from international law, the international law that is the legacy of the Holocaust, which is why it is such a terrible irony, historical irony, to watch as Israel tries to exclude itself from this most important legacy of the Holocaust. The only other country that does this with such fervor is the United States. Israel's main patron. So we're dealing with this very, very powerful case of double exceptionalism. So Ibrahim Muammar is absolutely right. Palestinians who lost their homes, who lost their loved ones, who suffered collective punishment, deserve more than boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. They deserve justice under international law. But since we are still trapped in this logic of exceptionalism, we're not going to have any trials in the short term. And until there are trials, there will be boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. Thank you.